The first thing I heard when I stepped onto the bridge of the UES Steadfast Hand was screaming. Not from our ship, from the distress channel. A woman's voice, raw and cracking, repeating the same coordinates over and over, her words dissolving into static between each cry. I had been holding a cup of coffee. I set it down very carefully on the edge of the console and did not pick it up again. Signal origin, I said. Lieutenant Kara Oren, my communications officer, was already pulling it up. She was 24 years old, 3 years out of the academy, and her hands were not shaking. I had trained her well. Keth Sovereignty Border, Commander Voss, deep inside it, about 6 light years past the Concord marker buoys. How deep is deep? Deep enough that we are not supposed to be there, she said. I looked at the signal trace on her screen. The coordinates placed the source in a stretch of space that the Galactic Concord's maps labeled, without any hint of irony, as unregulated passage corridor. Every species in the galaxy had a polite name for places where nobody would come if you were in trouble. This was one of them. I had been serving aboard Joint Species Concord vessels for 11 years. The Steadfast Hand was my third posting and my first command. We were a mid-class escort frigate, 6 human crew, 9 non-human crew, and we had been assigned the single most ordinary mission available in the Concord's rotation. Escort a civilian colony transport from Earth's outer relay station to a new settlement world called Crest Point, 32 light-years away. 4,000 colonists, 912 children among them. The colony ship was called the Far Promise. It was old, slow, and about as defensible as a paper bag. That was why we were here. Elder Roth of the Valthek, my senior diplomatic advisor, 400 years old, 6-limbed, and constitutionally incapable of being surprised by anything, unfolded himself from his observation chair at the back of the bridge and walked forward. His footsteps were always quiet. I had never heard him rush. The signal is inside Keth territory, he said. Not a question, yes. The Concord protocols for signals originating inside Keth territory require a minimum 72-hour notification process before any vessel may. I know what the protocols say, I told him. He looked at me. His eyes were large and pale and very old. You are going to respond to it. I am going to respond to it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, the Keth have 7 registered warship patrols in that corridor. I know. And you are still going. I turned back to the console. Oren, open a channel to the Far Promise. Tell Captain Greer to hold position at the relay marker and not move for any reason until we return. Then set our course for those coordinates. Aye, Commander. Roth stood beside me for another moment. Then very slowly he walked back to his chair. I heard him say something quietly to Vessel Speaker Tor, the Valthek navigator, in their own language. I did not speak Valthek well enough to catch it all, but I caught the last word. It was the Valthek word for beginning. We crossed the border marker at 0340 ship time. I did not sleep. I sat in my command chair and listened to the distress signal on a low channel, while Oren tracked it, and the rest of the bridge crew worked in focused silence. My human crew had a habit of going quiet when something serious was happening. Not scared quiet, focused quiet. There was a difference, and I had learned to tell them apart a long time ago. Pilot Officer Dan Hartley, who was 22 and had grown up in a fishing town on the coast of Western England, had his hands loose on the flight controls and was flying with the kind of easy precision that only comes from someone who genuinely does not think about it anymore. I had watched him bring us through worse than this with the same relaxed grip. Navigator Second Class Priya was cross-referencing the signal coordinates with 3 different star charts simultaneously, her dark eyes moving fast across the screens, her right hand already plotting the secondary approach vectors in case we needed them. She did not need to be told. She just did it. Engineer Specialist Lou Brecker, who was 41 and had transferred from civilian cargo work after 15 years, was running a quiet check of our shield systems from his secondary console. Not because anyone ordered it, because it was the sensible thing to do. The non-human crew watched all of this with the particular kind of attention that I had come to recognize over 11 years. They were not scared either. They were something else, something I did not have a word for in English, and probably not in any other language either. The woman's voice on the distress channel was getting quieter. That worried me more than the Keth warship readings on our long-range sensors. We came out of our final approach burn at 0512, and I saw the Far Promise colony ship on the screen, and for 3 full seconds I did not say anything at all. It had been boarded. The airlock seals along the starboard side had been cut, not forced. Cut with equipment that knew exactly what it was doing. A Keth interceptor was docked against the hull at 2 separate points. The colony ship's running lights were on emergency minimum. The woman's voice on the distress channel was almost gone now, just breathing. How long have they been aboard? I said. Sensor estimate based on hull temperature at the breach points. Priya said, approximately 4 hours. 4 hours. I had been drinking coffee 4 hours ago. I had been thinking about whether to send a personal message to my sister for her birthday, which was next week. I had been doing ordinary things while 4,000 people on a slow old colony ship were spending 4 hours with Keth. Marauders aboard. Get me a life sign scan, I said. Full every deck. The scan took 40 seconds. Oren read me the results in a steady voice. And she did it well. And I could hear what it cost her to keep her voice steady. And I was proud of her for it. Most of the adults were in the forward cargo bays. Contained, controlled. The Keth were efficient. They had done this before. The children's berths on decks 7 through 9, all 912 berths, were empty. I sat very still in my command chair. Outside the viewport, the Far Promise drifted against the dark with its emergency lights on, patient and helpless and waiting. Roth moved to stand beside me again. He did not speak, he just stood there very quietly, and after a moment I realized he was not looking at the screen. He was looking at me. I understood dimly that what was happening in my chest was not fear. I had felt fear before. I knew what it felt like. This was something older than fear. Something that did not have edges. Oren, I said. My voice came out perfectly calm, I noticed that. Open a channel to every human vessel within 6 light years. Priority Alpha. Use my command code. She hesitated for just a fraction of a second. Priority Alpha was not something a frigate commander was supposed to issue. It was a general military mobilization signal. It required authorization from a flag officer. I was not a flag officer. Commander, she said carefully. Open the channel, Oren. She opened the channel. I leaned forward and spoke into it clearly, and I told whoever was listening exactly where we were, exactly what we had found, and exactly what I needed. Then I closed the channel and stood up from my command chair. Brecker, I said. Get me a 6-person boarding kit, standard entry, no heavy equipment, fast and quiet. Already pulling it, he said. Roth spoke. Commander Voss. His voice was not alarmed. In 400 years, not much alarmed him. But it was careful. You are intending to board the Far Promise yourself. Yes. The Keth interceptors are still docked. There are an estimated 40 to 60 Keth personnel aboard. Yes. And you are taking 6 people. 7, including me, I said. And we are not going to fight 40 Keth. We are going to find 900 children and bring them home. I looked at him. Those are 2 different things. He held my gaze for a long moment. Then he said, very quietly, in perfect English, I have served 400 years in the Concorde. I have watched a great many species go to war. A pause. I do not think I have ever seen a human decide something the way you just decided that. I did not know what to say to that, so I did not say anything. I picked up my sidearm from the equipment locker beside my chair, checked it once, and clipped it to my side. Hold position, I told the bridge. If Keth warships approach, you maneuver. You do not engage. You stay alive until the others arrive. And if they don't arrive, Den said, not accusingly, just asking. I looked at him. He was 22 years old and he had grown up catching fish on a gray coast, and he deserved an honest answer. They'll arrive, I said. I walked off the bridge, and the doors closed behind me, and I did not look back. The airlock of the Far Promise opened 30 seconds after I touched the external panel. Someone on the other side had kept it manually accessible. That told me something. That told me someone side was still thinking, still fighting, still holding on. The corridor inside was dark except for the red emergency strips along the floor. My team spread out without a word. We had trained together for 18 months. We did not need to talk. Brecker took point. Oren, who had insisted on being part of the boarding team, and whose insistence I had not argued with, covered the rear. We moved fast and quiet through the lower deck passageways, heading up toward the children's berths on deck 7. The ship smelled like fear, like people who had been afraid for a long time in a closed space. I knew that smell. I had encountered it twice before in 11 years of service, and both times it had done the same thing to me that it was doing now. It made me very, very focused. We found the first group of children on deck 6, hidden in an equipment locker behind the secondary water recycling unit. 41 of them, ages 3 to 12, crammed into a space meant for maintenance tools, completely silent. A young woman was with them, crew member, mid-20s, holding the smallest ones against her sides and pressing her finger to her lips even as we appeared, because she had been doing that for hours and her body had not gotten the message that it could stop. Her name badge said Lena Marsh, crew steward. She looked at my uniform and her face did something complicated and she started to say something, and I shook my head gently and held up 4 fingers and pointed up, meaning more. She nodded. She pointed to the ceiling twice, then the floor once, then held up fingers. 3 more groups. Above and below. I nodded. I touched her shoulder once. Then we moved. We found them in the next 40 minutes, hidden in crawl spaces, inside sealed storage containers that someone had figured out how to open from within, tucked under floor panels in the maintenance corridors. Groups of 15, 30, 22, 11. Frightened and silent and mostly very young and extraordinarily, heartbreakingly well-behaved, because the adults who had hidden them had asked them to be quiet, and they were trying so hard. By the time we reached the upper deck, we had 487 children, moving in careful groups back toward the lower airlock under the guidance of 3 of my team members. But the scan had said 912. The rest are on the Keth interceptor, Brecker said, looking at his scanner. Not emotional flat. Operational. Yes, I said they already moved them. Yes. He looked at me. We go after the ship. It was not a question. It was not even really directed at me. He was just saying what both of us already knew. We go after the ship, I said. Outside the Far Promises viewports, the Keth interceptor was pulling away, slowly, unhurried. They thought this was over. They thought they had what they came for, and there was nothing and nobody in this part of space who was going to change. That. I reached for my communicator. I found the Keth ship's hailing frequency on the open band, because Keth ships always left their hailing frequencies open. They liked to hear things. I opened the channel. This is Commander Seraph Voss of the United Earth ship Steadfast Hand, I said. You have children aboard your vessel that belong to my people. I am going to come and get them, all of them, every single one. I paused. I am telling you this because I want you to know it is coming. That is all. I closed the channel. Behind me, in the dark of the Far Promises corridor, Marsh was holding the smallest child against her chest and looking at me with an expression I could not fully read. Brecker was checking his equipment. Oren was quiet. Above us, the Keth interceptor continued to pull away into the dark. I started walking toward our airlock, and my team followed, and none of us were running, because we did not need to run. We knew where they were going. We knew where we were going. The dark of space is very large, but it does not hide as well as it thinks it does. Not from us, not when it has our children. The Keth interceptor was a fast ship, and it knew it. The pilot was pushing the engines hard, pulling away from the Far Promise at a clip that said very clearly, "This is over, and you know it." They had calculated the distances, the response times, the complete absence of any human military presence within range. They had done their math. They were confident in their math. The problem with their math was that it did not account for the 11 ships that answered my priority alpha signal. The first to arrive was the cargo hauler Brendan's Run, skippered by a retired naval officer named Captain Gus Calloway, who had been carrying agricultural equipment to a farming colony when my signal cut across every channel he had. He brought his ship in hard and fast and came out of jump transit so close to the Keth interceptor that the proximity alarms must have gone wild on their bridge. Calloway was 63 years old and had spent 40 years in space, and he did not say a single word on the open channel. He just positioned his ship between the interceptor and open space and held it there. The second ship was the research vessel Meridian Point, a small science craft with 3 crew and no weapons whatsoever. They came anyway. By the time the third ship arrived, a private security contractor called the Aldrich Horn, 2 guns and a crew of 8, the Keth interceptor had stopped accelerating. I watched their engine output drop on my scanner, and I felt something in my chest that was not quite satisfaction and not quite relief but was somewhere near both of them. We were back aboard the Steadfast Hand by then. I had returned to my command chair and Roth was standing just behind my right shoulder, which was where he had been for most of the last 2 hours, and I was very aware of him being there without entirely knowing why. "They have stopped," Roth said. "Yes. 11 ships," he said. "You sent 1 signal and 11 ships came." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "Then, none of them were ordered here." "No," I said. "They just came." "They heard children," I said. "That is what humans do when they hear children." Another silence. I glanced back at him. His pale eyes were moving between the scanner screens and the viewports, and his expression was the closest thing to unreadable I had ever seen on a Valthek face, which was saying quite a lot. "I find I would like to know," he said very carefully, "exactly how often this happens. How often what happens." "This," he said, and he gestured with one of his long hands at all of it. The 11 ships, the scanner readings, the Keth interceptor sitting very still in space. I turned back to the forward viewport. "Often enough," I said. "The Keth hailed us 17 minutes after their ship stopped. It was the captain of the interceptor, a ranking officer named something I could not pronounce, who opened the channel with the formal Keth greeting that meant, roughly, 'I come to negotiate.' I had dealt with Keth officials before, in port and in transit meetings. They were efficient, and they were cold, and they valued leverage above everything else. They understood the concept of negotiation the way some people understand a weapon, as a thing you use to get what you want. He spoke in Keth, and Oren translated in a murmur beside me. He was willing to return the children. He wanted safe passage for his vessel. He wanted formal Concord assurances that no action would be taken against the Keth nation for what had occurred. He wanted, in short, to walk away from this the way the Keth always walked away from things, quietly, without consequence, having learned nothing. I waited until Oren finished translating. Then I opened the return channel. No, I said. Oren translated it. On the other end there was a pause. The captain spoke again, longer this time. He mentioned the size of the Keth nation. He mentioned their military capacity. He mentioned the Concord protocols that required dispute resolution through tribunal rather than direct action. He mentioned that 11 ships, while impressive, were not impressive enough. I waited again. Here is what is going to happen, I said. You are going to transfer every child on your vessel to the Far Promise within the next 60 minutes. You are going to do this without conditions and without demands. After that, you are going to remain in your current position while I contact your government directly. Those are the only terms I am offering. There will not be others. Oren translated. The silence on the other end was longer this time. The captain's response when it came was angry. He used words that Oren softened slightly in translation, but I got the meaning. He was telling me I did not understand who I was talking to. He was telling me I did not understand what the Keth nation was. He was telling me that one human commander with 11 small ships was not a threat to a civilization that had held sovereign territory for 6,000 years. I listened to all of it. Transfer the children, I said. 60 minutes. I closed the channel. Roth spoke from behind me. He is not wrong about the Keth nation's military capacity. I know. If they choose to treat this as a military incident rather than a criminal one, the forces they can bring to bear. Roth, I said. Yes. Did I ask about the Keth nation's military capacity? A pause. You did not. Then we are not discussing it. Another pause, longer. Then, in a tone I had never heard from him in 11 years, something that might have been on a human face the very beginning of a smile. No, he said. I suppose we are not. The children started coming across 48 minutes later. They came through the transfer airlock in groups, escorted by Keth crew members, who could not quite manage to look at the 11 ships surrounding them without their posture changing. My team received each group at the docking collar and walked them through to the Far Promise, where Lena Marsh and the other surviving crew members had set up a receiving space in the forward cargo bay with blankets and water and emergency. Lights turned up to full brightness because dark was the last thing any of them needed right now. I stood at the collar and counted. It is a strange thing, counting children. Each face, each small hand gripping the arm of whoever was walking beside them. Some of them were crying. Some of them were not, because they were past crying. Into that exhausted quiet place that children get to when they have been afraid for too long, and the fear has burned through itself and left something very still behind. One boy, who could not have been older than 5, walked through the collar holding a stuffed animal against his chest and looked up at me very seriously as he passed. And I met his eyes, and I kept my face steady and calm, and I held it together. 912. I counted 912 children come through that collar. And when the last one was through, I stood in the empty docking space for a moment with my hand flat against the wall of the ship, just breathing. Brecker appeared at my elbow. He did not say anything. He just stood there for a moment, and that was enough. Then I straightened up and walked back to the bridge, because there was still work to do. The Concorde was not happy with me. The notification came through official channels before the last child had even crossed the collar. A priority. Communication from Concord Oversight bearing the formal seal that meant someone very senior was paying attention. I set it aside and did not open it until the children were all across and the transfer airlock was sealed. The message was from Director Aleph Payne of the Concord Enforcement Division, and it was 12 paragraphs long, and I will summarize it. I had violated 6 border protocols, issued an unauthorized priority alpha mobilization signal, failed to follow dispute resolution procedures, and conducted a boarding action on a foreign registered vessel without Concord sanction. I was to stand down immediately, hold position, and await the arrival of a formal Concord response team. I read it twice. Then I opened a channel to the Keth nation's official diplomatic frequency, the one that every Keth ship broadcast on, the one that their government monitored around the clock. And I began to speak. I did not threaten. I want to be precise about that, because the transcripts were reviewed later and that word came up often, and it is not accurate. I did not threaten the Keth nation. I made them an offer. I told them what had happened. I told them how many children had been taken. I told them what it had cost me to count them coming through that collar. And then I told them, in plain and simple language, that they had 48 hours to do 3 things. Hand over every individual responsible for what had occurred that day. Formally disband the marauder operations they had been running in this corridor for the past decade. And enter into reparations negotiations with the families aboard the Far Promise. I told them that if they did not, I would spend the remainder of my career ensuring that every species in the Concord, every shipping company, every trade partner, every neutral government knew exactly what the Keth Nation had done to 900 children today, and exactly what humanity's response had been, not as a military matter, as a permanent fact about who the Keth were and what dealing with them cost. You have 6,000 years of civilization, I said. I have 48 hours of your attention. Use them well. I closed the channel. Roth was standing at the back of the bridge. He had been standing there throughout the call. When I turned to look at him, he was very still, and his pale eyes were doing something I could not entirely read. In 400 years, he said quietly, I have heard many things said to sovereign governments, and he considered it. That, he said, was the clearest thing I have ever heard. 11 ships around us held their positions, and the Far Promise drifted quietly in the dark, and the Keth Interceptor sat very still in space. And out in the wider galaxy the 48-hour clock was running. And somewhere on Deck 4 of the Far Promise, Lena Marsh was sitting on the floor of the cargo bay with 200 children around her, and she was reading to them from a storybook she had found in an emergency kit, and her voice was steady and warm, and the children were listening, and the lights were bright, and they were all right. For now, they were all right. That was everything. That was the only thing that mattered. I sat in my command chair and kept my eyes on the sensor screens, and I did not sleep, and I did not stop watching, and I did not intend to. Not until they were home. The 48 hours did not pass quietly. At hour 4, the Concord Oversight sent a second message. This one was shorter than the first and significantly less polite. It informed me that Director Payne had personally escalated my case to the full enforcement panel, that my command authority over the Steadfast Hand was under review, and that any further unauthorized communications on the Keth diplomatic frequency would constitute a formal breach of Concord Article 7. Section 12, which governs sovereign state contact protocols. I noted the message in the ship's log, which I was required to do, and then I continued watching the sensor screens. At hour 9, the Far Promise captain, a steady man named Owen Greer, who had been running colony transports for 22 years, sent me a personal message. He had seen the Concord directives. He knew the position I was in. He wrote 3 sentences. The first said, "They are all accounted for and medically cleared." The second said, "They want to know who found them." The third said, "I told them a human commander did it." That was all he needed to say. At hour 14, Roth came to sit beside me in the second officer's chair, which he almost never used. He brought 2 cups of something warm from the galley. Not coffee, which he did not drink, but the Valthek equivalent, which smelled like cedar and tasted, I had always thought, like a library. He set one in front of me without asking whether I wanted it. We sat together for a while without speaking. Then he said, "The Keth Grand Council has called an emergency session." I know. Oren picked up the subspace traffic. "The deliberations are significant," he paused. "I have some familiarity with Keth political structure. They do not call emergency sessions for small matters." "Good," I said. "There is also activity in the Concord Diplomatic Corps that suggests several other species are watching this situation very carefully." "Which species?" He listed them. I did not react to most of the names, but one of them made me stop and set down my cup. "The Veri Collective?" I said. "Yes. The Veri were old, older than the Concord, older than most of the member species, old enough that they measured time in geological epochs rather than years. They did not involve themselves in what they called current events, which was their term for anything that had happened in the last several thousand years. If the Veri were watching, it meant something had registered on a scale they considered worth attention." "What are they saying?" I asked. Roth was quiet for a moment. "The fragments we have intercepted are incomplete, but the word that appears most frequently, in translation, is unusual." I looked at him. "Unusual." "From the Veri," he said. "That is approximately the equivalent of another species saying extraordinary." I thought about that. Outside the viewport, space was the same as it always was. Dark and vast and full of things that had been there long before any of us and would be there long after. The Far Promise was visible at a distance, its lights steady now, its emergency indicators off. 11 ships still held a loose formation around us. None of them had been ordered here. None of them had left. Roth, I said, can I ask you something honestly? You may ask. I will answer honestly if I am able. When we first arrived here and I said I was going to respond to the distress signal regardless of the protocols, you said something to Vessel, Speaker Tor, in Valthek. You used a word I almost caught. He was still for a moment. You heard that? I did. He folded his hands together, which was a Valthek gesture I had come to recognize as the equivalent of a long pause. The word I used, he said finally, was our word for the point at which a thing that was hidden becomes visible. I waited. We have watched humans for 200 years, he said. In the Concord, you are considered young, impulsive. You feel things too strongly. You are considered somewhat charming, in the way that very young species often are, but not serious, not yet. He paused. I have thought privately for some years that this assessment was a mistake. Why? Because I have watched how human beings behave around their children, he said, and I have thought, quietly to myself, not something I said to anyone, that any species which behaves that way around its children is not impulsive. It is something else entirely. He looked at me. Yesterday you confirmed it. At hour 21, the Concord Enforcement Panel issued a formal suspension of my command authority pending a full review hearing. This meant, technically, that I was no longer in command of the Steadfast Hand, and that the senior remaining officer, which was Roth, by virtue of Concord rank structure, was now in charge. Roth, read the notification. He set it aside. Yes? You have just been notified that you are in command of this vessel. I have received the notification, yes, he said. Are you going to take command? He considered the question very seriously, in the way he considered all things. Then he said, I find myself unable to identify what I would do differently from what you are currently doing, and it seems wasteful to make a change for its own sake. A pause. I am going to continue sitting here. You may continue doing what you are doing. That might get you in trouble with the Concord, I said. I am 400 years old, he said. I have been in trouble with the Concord before. It passes. At hour 31, the first transcript leak came through the news networks. Someone inside the Keth Grand Council's emergency session had access to an unsecured relay, and 17 minutes of their deliberations made it to the public Galactic Information Network, before the Keth government could suppress it. I read the translated transcript on Oren's secondary screen, standing behind her chair, my hand on the back of it. The session had been heated. The Keth Grand Council was composed of 9 members representing the major Keth territorial blocks, and the transcript showed all 9 of them speaking at once at several points, which the translator noted was extremely unusual in Keth political procedure. Most of what they said was what you would expect: procedural arguments, debates about response options, assessments of the Concord's likely position. But at one point near the middle of the transcript, one of the council members, identified only by a reference number, not a name, said something that the translator flagged with an asterisk and a note that read, idiomatic, translation approximate. The translation read, we did not understand what they were. Nobody told us what they were. Nobody in the room had contradicted it. At hour 36, I left the bridge for the first time since we had arrived at the colony ship's position. I went to the Far Promise. I did not announce the visit. I took a shuttle across and went through the receiving area and found my way to the forward cargo bay, which had been converted into a temporary living base for the families while the ship underwent the slow process of being made fully operational again. It was busy and warm and slightly noisy in the way that a large space full of children always is, and I stood in the entrance for a moment just letting that noise be real. Lena Marsh found me before I found anyone else. She looked better than she had in the dark corridor, still tired, deeply tired but steady. She shook my hand with both of hers and did not say anything for a moment, and I did not either, and that was fine. Then she said, there is someone who wanted to see you specifically. She led me across the cargo bay, through clusters of families sitting on emergency bedding, past a group of older children who had organized themselves into a card game in the corner, past a medical team doing quiet check-ins with the smallest ones, to a space near the far wall, where a little girl was sitting on a folded blanket, drawing something on a piece of paper with a crayon. She was 7 years old. She had brown hair cut short, and a small face that was very serious, and a drawing that she held up immediately when she saw me approaching, with the confidence of someone presenting important evidence. It was a drawing of a ship. My ship. I realized she had gotten the general shape roughly right, with what appeared to be 11 other ships around it, represented as circles with lines coming out. In the middle of the largest ship, which was the Steadfast Hand, she had drawn a small figure with very straight posture, That's you, she told me, pointing at the figure. Is it? Yes. She considered the drawing. I made you taller. I appreciate that, I said. Her name was Clara Webb, and she had been hiding in a maintenance crawl space for 4 hours with 11 other children. And she was 7 years old and perfectly calm, and she asked me very directly if the bad people were gone. I told her honestly that the people who had boarded her ship were gone and would not be coming back. She considered this. What about other bad people? I looked at her for a moment. She deserved an honest answer. She was 7 and she had earned one. Some bad people always exist, I said. That is true. But right now, a lot of other people know what happened to you and your friends. And those other people are not going to forget about it. She seemed to weigh this carefully, with the gravity that children bring to things that actually matter to them. Okay, she said. And then, are you going to get in trouble for coming to get us? Probably a little bit, I said. She nodded, like this confirmed something she had expected. Then she went back to her drawing. She added a sun in the corner, and around the sun she drew small shapes that I slowly realized were meant to be more ships, all going the same direction. I sat with her for 20 minutes. Then I went back to the steadfast hand, and I sat in my command chair, and I waited. 11 hours left. At hour 44, the Keth Nation's official diplomatic bureau sent a transmission on the same open frequency I had used to address them. It was addressed to me specifically, by name and rank. It requested that I name a time and channel for formal negotiations regarding the terms I had outlined 44 hours ago. I read it twice. I looked at Roth. They blinked, Den said from the pilot seat. He said it quietly, almost to himself. Pilot Officer Hartley, I said. Commander? Please maintain heading, he said. And then very quietly so that only I could hear. Told you they'd come. I opened the channel. I confirmed the time and frequency, and said I looked forward to the conversation. Then I closed it, and I looked at the far promise on the long-range screen, and I thought about 11 ships that nobody ordered. I thought about Gus Calloway dropping a cargo run to park his hauler between a Keth interceptor and open space, without a single word on the channel. I thought about the research vessel Meridian Point, arriving with 3 crew and no weapons, and holding its position anyway. I thought about all the math the Keth had done before today. The math that had told them there was nobody in range, nobody coming, nobody who would care enough to make it worth their while. All that careful math, and 11 ships that nobody ordered. I reached for my coffee. It had been sitting on the edge of the console for 4 hours and was cold. I drank it anyway. The formal session with the Keth Diplomatic Bureau lasted 7 hours, and I want to be honest about how strange that felt. 7 hours sitting in the steadfast hands communications room with Roth beside me, and Oren managing the translation feeds, speaking to 3 Keth officials who had been given a very clear directive from their Grand Council. Finish this. The lead Keth negotiator was a senior official named something long and consonant-heavy that I spent the first hour pronouncing incorrectly until he corrected me in accented but competent common tongue and told me to call him Delegate Venn. He was calm and formal and absolutely excellent at presenting surrender as though it were a mutual agreement, which I found I did not object to. The outcome was what mattered. They handed over the Keth Marauder commanders responsible for the colony shipboarding. 8 individuals in total, transferred to Concord custody, which I insisted upon rather than taking personal custody of them, because I was already in enough trouble with the Concord and I did not need to also be running an unauthorized detention facility. They formally dissolved the Marauder operations in the Passage Corridor, which represented about 30 years of quiet criminal enterprise and a significant loss of revenue to several powerful Keth interests. Delegate Venn presented this as a voluntary domestic policy reform. I did not correct him. They entered reparations negotiations with the colonist families, which would take months through the proper channels but which I made certain were entered into formally and on the record, because records matter, and because 6 months from now I wanted there to be documentation that could not be quietly buried. At the end of the 7 hours, Delegate Venn said something that I was not expecting. Commander Voss, he said, in a tone that was stripped of its diplomatic formality for just a moment. I have served this government for 30 years. I have negotiated with 42 different species. A pause. I want to tell you something, and I want you to understand it is being said honestly and not as any kind of tactic. Go ahead, I said. We did not know, he said, what you would do, what all of you would do. Another pause. We operate in this corridor. We have done so for a very long time. We have had interactions with many species. We have always understood the lines. What is tolerated? What brings a response? What can be done quietly? He seemed to consider his next words carefully. We did not have a line for this. I did not say anything. We had data on humanity, he said. Population figures, military capacity, political structure, standard metrics. He looked at me, and his eyes were difficult to read, being Keth. But there was something in them that I thought was genuine. We did not have a metric for 11 ships that no one ordered. I thought about what to say to that. You do now, I said. He inclined his head. Then the diplomatic formality came back like a door closing, and we finalized the documentation, and the session ended. Roth and I walked back to the bridge together. You are aware, he said, that the Concord Enforcement Panel is expecting you at a formal review hearing in 3 days. I am aware. 17 charges, he said. I have reviewed the list. And most of them are accurate, he said. You did violate those protocols. I did. You do not seem concerned. I thought about Clara Webb's drawing. The small figure with very straight posture, all the ships going the same direction. I am a little concerned, I said, but not about the right things probably. He made a sound that I had learned, over 11 years, was the Valthek equivalent of a quiet laugh. We reached the bridge. Den had the ship moving alongside the Far Promise now, matching speed, keeping us close until the Concord response team arrived to officially take over escort duties. The colony ship looked less battered from this angle. Its running lights were back on full, and there was something about its outline that I thought of as patient, ready to keep going. The Concord response team arrived 2 hours later. 6 ships, official capacity, flag officer aboard the lead vessel. They took up positions around the Far Promise, and I watched them on the screens, and I felt the shape of what was about to happen. A message came from the flagship. Commodore Aaron Wells, Senior Concord Authority for this sector, requesting my presence aboard his vessel for immediate formal review. I told Roth to maintain the steadfast hands position, and I told Oren to log everything, and I told Den to keep flying straight, and then I took a shuttle across to the flagship. Commodore Wells was a large gray-haired man who had been in the Concord service for 35 years, and had the kind of face that has been serious for so long it has forgotten how to be anything else. He met me in his briefing room with 3 other officers and a stack of documentation that someone had clearly been compiling for the last 48 hours. He told me that I had committed significant breaches of protocol. He told me the enforcement panel was deeply displeased. He told me that the diplomatic fallout from my unauthorized communications with the Keth government was being managed at levels far above my rank, and that several ambassadors were describing the situation as, quote, a crisis of Concord process. I let him finish. Then he set down the documentation and looked at me. 912 children, he said. Not as a number, as a weight. Yes, sir, I said. He was quiet for a moment. The Keth Nation formally completed all 3 of your stated conditions within the 48-hour window. I know. Their Grand Council issued a public statement this morning. I have not shared it widely yet. He picked up a single printed page from the bottom of the stack. He looked at it for a moment, then slid it across the table to me. The statement was in official Keth diplomatic language, which was dense and formal, but its core message was simple. It described the events of the past 48 hours. It described humanity's response to those events, and at the end, it contained a sentence that Delegate Venn had clearly written, or at least approved, because it had his particular quality of precision. The sentence read, "It is the formal position of the Keth Grand Council that any future interaction with human vessels must proceed with the understanding that harm to human children should be considered an act against the entire human species, not against individual parties, and will be responded to accordingly." I read it twice, then I set it back on the table. The enforcement panel, I said. What is actually going to happen? Wells looked at me for a long time. You are going to appear before them, he said. You are going to answer the charges on the record. And then, most likely, your case is going to be suspended pending an ongoing review that will take approximately 2 years to complete. He paused, during which time you will remain in active service, because the Concord has decided at its highest levels that removing you from service right now would create an impression they are not prepared to manage. What impression? He looked at me very steadily. That the Concord was going to punish the person who brought 11 ships to find 900 children, he said, which they are not prepared to explain to humanity. I thought about that. There is one more thing, Wells said. He reached into the documentation stack and pulled out a single-page internal memo bearing the seal of the Concord's Articles Committee. This has been in draft for 16 hours. It is going to pass. The vote is already determined. I read it. It was a proposed amendment to the Concord's Articles of Engagement. A new clause, short and clear. It stated that acts of harm against any species' children were to be formally classified as acts of hostility against the entire species. not merely criminal incidents, and were to be responded to as such under Article 1, which was the Concord's foundational mutual defense commitment. At the bottom of the draft, in small text, was the reference code that would be assigned when it was formally adopted. The code included, as all such articles do, a notation to the incident that had prompted its drafting. It said, Voss Incident, UES, Steadfast Hand, Commander S. Voss. I set the memo down carefully on the table. Wells was watching me. I did not say anything for a moment, because I did not trust myself to say something brief and I did not want to say something long. Thank you, sir, I said finally. He nodded once. There will be a formal review hearing in 3 days, he said. 17 charges. You will plead as the facts require. Yes, sir. And Commander. He paused. The 11 ships. The civilians who responded to your signal. Yes? None of them are being charged with anything, he said. We looked at the statutes. There is nothing in Concord law that makes it illegal to fly toward a distress signal. He seemed to consider this for a moment. Someone wrote those laws a long time ago and apparently did not think that situation through. No, I said. I don't suppose they did, he almost smiled. Get back to your ship, Commander. I got back to my ship. The review hearing took place 3 days later, in the Concord Administrative Station at Relay Point 7. It was a plain gray room with good lighting and 17 numbered charges printed on a document that had been placed in front of me on a plain gray table. There were 5 members of the enforcement panel. 2 of them were human, 3 were not. I sat in the chair they had given me, and I looked at the charges and I pleaded as Commodore Wells had put it, as the facts required. Guilty, guilty, guilty. 17 times. The panel reviewed my statements. They asked me several questions, most of which concerned procedure. I answered them honestly. At no point did anyone in the room ask me whether I would do it differently. I think they knew the answer would not help their documentation. At the end of the formal portion, the lead panel member, a long-serving Concord official named Director Payne, who I had now communicated with entirely through increasingly stern written messages, looked at me for a long moment and then said, Commander Voss, is there anything you wish to add to the formal record? I thought about what I wanted to say. I had thought about it for 3 days. I had sat on the bridge of the Steadfast Hand and thought about 11 ships and 900 children and a little girl with a crayon and a 400-year-old diplomat who had stopped me from calling what I did impulsive by finding a better word for it. I had thought about Delegate Venn telling me they did not have a metric for us. I had thought about the Keth Grand Council calling an emergency session because they had done math that was completely correct except for the part where it did not account for what humans do. Yes, I said, one thing. Director Payne nodded. We are not what you think we are, I said. Not what most of the galaxy thinks we are. We have been in space for 200 years and we have been treated as young. And I understand why. We are young, by the standards of species that count time in thousands of years. We make decisions quickly. We feel things strongly. These are not weaknesses. I paused. They are the reason 900 children came home. No one said anything. I violated 17 protocols, I said. I would violate them again. I will always violate them again, because there is no protocol in any document that will ever be more important to me than a child who needs to come home. I looked at Director Payne. I think most humans would say the same. I think most humans do say the same, every single day, in quiet ways that nobody writes reports about. We just don't usually need to say it out loud. The room was very quiet. I said. Director Payne held my gaze for a moment. Then he nodded and made a note, and the hearing was formally closed. My case was suspended pending review. Everyone in the room understood it would not be revisited. I walked out of the building into the station's main corridor, and Roth was waiting for me on a bench near the exit. He had not been permitted in the hearing room, which was regulation, and he stood when he saw me and said nothing. We should get back to the ship, I said. Yes, he said. He fell into step beside me. After a moment, how did it go? 17 guilty pleas, said, suspended pending review. I expected that. You did? I have been watching the galactic communications channels for 3 days, he said. There is a word that has been appearing with increasing frequency in transmissions between species that do not usually have much to say to each other. What word? He told me. It was in Very, the old language, the one that the oldest species used when they were being careful. The translation was imprecise, but it meant something like, the moment when a hidden thing becomes clear. The very word, I said. The one you used in Valthek. A close cousin of it, yes, he said. They have had a long time to collect precise words for this kind of thing. We walked through the corridor together, past Concord staff and alien officials and human technicians on shift change. All the ordinary traffic of a relay station in a vast and complicated galaxy. I said, Do you think this changes things? Actually changes them, I mean. Not just for the Keth. He was quiet for several steps. I think, he said slowly, that for 6,000 years, the Keth nation existed in this galaxy without understanding what humanity was. I think they are not the only ones who lack that understanding, and I think that situations which correct a misunderstanding of that magnitude tend to leave permanent marks. Permanent marks, I said. The article passes today, he said. I checked before the hearing. It is now Concord law. I thought about that as we walked. Somewhere in the galaxy, the text of a new clause was being added to the oldest document in the Concord's history. A short, clear sentence about children and what it costs to harm them. Does it feel like what you expected? He asked. When you sent that priority alpha signal, I thought about it honestly. I did not think about what it would feel like, I said. I thought about the empty berths. He nodded, very slowly, the way he did when something confirmed something he had already understood. We reached the docking bay and the shuttle that would take us back to the steadfast hand. Through the viewport, I could see the ship's running lights, steady, clean, unhurried. You know, I said, I do not regret any of it. No, he said, I know you do not. Not even the 17 guilty pleas. No. A pause. I want to tell you something, Commander. Something I have not said in 400 years of service. I looked at him. It has been an honor, he said simply, to watch this. I did not know what to say to that. So I said nothing for a moment, and he did not seem to need me to. We boarded the shuttle. The bay doors opened, and the dark outside was full of stars, and the steadfast hand was waiting. I thought about Clara Webb's drawing, the ship in the center, the smaller circles all around it, all going the same direction, and the little figure with the very straight posture standing in the middle of it, all. She had made me taller. I thought that somewhere out there, in the new settlement world they were still heading toward, she and 911 other children were going to grow up, and go to school, and make drawings of other things, and the thing that had happened to them would fade, the way hard things do when you are young enough, and safe enough, and surrounded by enough people who care. And in the Concord's legal archives, a new article would be there when they were old. A short, clear sentence. A permanent mark. The shuttle cleared the bay, and I watched the station fall behind us, and ahead, the steadfast hand turned to meet us. Let's go home, I said. Den Hartley on the shuttle control said, Aye, Commander, and we went.